a group of exhausted survivors trudged along the road. They had been starving for 2 full days, desperate to escape the relentless pursuit of zombies. Several of them stood wearily on either side of a bridge, conserving their energy. It was the only way for them to shake off the zombies behind them. The end times have kept them alive for so long that their cooperation has become instinctive and they no longer need words. These zombies just fell off one by one. However, Sasha didn't follow the plan, disrupting the team's rhythm. Rick had no choice but to tell everyone to grab their weapons and deal with the situation quickly. Sasha acted differently because she had just lost her younger brother. Now, whenever she saw a zombie, anger consumed her. Her recklessness nearly resulted in Rick getting bitten, but luckily, Daryl came to the rescue, inadvertently injuring Abraham in the process. A few minutes later, all the zombies had been taken care of. The group didn't blame Sasha, as they understood her emotions. After clearing the zombies, the group resumed their journey along the road. However, their biggest challenge now was the lack of food and water. They had been hungry for a whole day. Soon, they came across several cars up ahead. They checked them but found no supplies. The cars couldn't even be started. Exhausted, they had no choice but to rest by the roadside. They didn't know how much longer they could hold on. Daryl had gone into the woods to see if he could hunt for food. Daryl even eats earthworms raw, but he returned empty-handed. The days of going hungry made them even more desperate to find a place to settle. Just as they were famished and feeling hopeless, they heard a noise coming from the woods. Immediately, everyone became alert. To their surprise, it was a few dogs barking wildly at them. Rick and Daryl were about to strike when the sound of a gun with a silencer rings out. Sasha is still in a bad mood and is taking it out on the dogs. Rick didn't say anything but instead found a long stick in the forest. It seemed like a stroke of luck. They finally had dinner for the night. In the past, they wouldn't have considered eating dogs, but now they didn't care about such things. They would eat whatever they could to fill their bellies. Even the Godfather Gabriel, the hypocrite, took off the symbol and threw it into the fire. Nothing was more important than staying alive. After getting their fill, the group continued their journey. Glenn handed Maggie the last bit of water, but she was not in high spirits as she had also lost her sister. Glenn comforted her and then passed the water to Daryl, but it was rejected. Daryl wanted to save the remaining water for others. Soon after, Daryl ventured into the nearby woods again, hoping to find a river. Once in the forest, he came across a barn but chose not to investigate and instead sat down, consumed by sorrow as he smoked. Beth's death had deeply saddened him, and he blamed himself for not protecting her. The tough guy had come out alone, shielding his vulnerability from others. The last time he had shed tears was when his brother turned into a zombie. After a while, the rest of the group found the much-needed mineral water on the road. When they saw Daryl return, Rick handed him a note. It was strange, and they were certain someone was monitoring them. Rick warned everyone not to drink the water, suspecting it might be a trap. However, Eugene could not hold back any longer and reached for the water and was about to drink it, but was knocked down by Abraham. Eugene could only lick his lips helplessly. At that moment, a loud rumbling sound came from the sky. Everyone looked up, and then the rain poured down, accompanied by increasingly loud thunder. It seemed that even the heavens didn't want them to give up. A simple rain shower brought them hope, and smiles appeared on everyone's faces, except for Maggie and Sasha, who still carried their pain. Rick reminded everyone to quickly find containers to collect the rainwater since they didn't know when the next rainfall would come. However, as Rick gazed into the distance, he sensed something was wrong. The dark clouds were thickening, and the thunder grew louder. Tonight was destined to be a night of raging storm. They had to move quickly and seek a shelter. Soon, they arrived at the barn that Daryl had found. It was spacious enough to accommodate everyone. At night, although the branches were damp, they managed to build a fire. Everyone needed a good rest. However, Daryl went to the door and noticed the strong winds outside. Watching the door shaking violently, he intended to secure it somehow, but to his surprise, countless zombies were approaching from outside. He quickly braced himself against the door, knowing that if they broke through, their chances of survival would be slim. However, his strength alone was limited. Maggie also noticed something amiss and rushed over to support him. Slowly, Sasha also arrived, and those inside who were chatting were drawn to the commotion. Realizing the seriousness of the situation, they all rushed over to reinforce the door. Each person exerted every ounce of their strength. If they couldn't hold it, they would face a horde of zombies and a raging storm. The next day, Maggie woke up to find Judith in Rick's arms. The sight of this cute little child immediately made her feel much better. The night before, everyone was exhausted and deeply asleep, except for Daryl, who sat at the door in sorrow. He and Maggie, along with Sasha, carried a lingering melancholy as they had lost people they cared about. Just hope they can get over the pain soon. Maggie decided to go for a walk with Sasha, intending to support and comfort each other. When they stepped outside, they saw the scattered remains of the zombie horde that had been smashed by fallen trees during the storm. Can imagine how windy it was last night. The scenery after the storm was so beautiful. The serenity of the surroundings brought a sense of calm and tranquility. Maggie, accompanied by Sasha, arrived at a particular spot. Both of them had lost loved ones and were immersed in grief. Now, as they admired the scenery and chatted with each other, their moods improved. Suddenly, a man silently approached them, greeting them gently. Instantly, both women became wary. This man was incredibly handsome and polite. He smiled and introduced himself as Aaron. He acknowledged the danger of strangers but claimed to be their friend. He expressed his desire to speak with their leader, Rick. Maggie and Sasha grew even more perplexed. How did this person know Rick's name? They'd been out on the streets for a week. Rick has his head down thinking about how to keep everyone alive. At that moment, Maggie pushed the door open and returned. Seeing a stranger, everyone immediately went on guard. Daryl was the first to step forward and ran outside to check for any ambush. He then proceeded to frisk the man, ensuring he had no weapons on him. Maggie explained to the group that they had encountered him outside. The man willingly surrendered his weapons as well. Aaron was feeling somewhat uneasy at this point. He hadn't expected the group to appear so unfriendly. After hesitating for a couple of seconds, he managed to force a smile and greeted them. Aaron couldn't help but admire Rick's leadership aura. Despite their current downtrodden state, Rick's presence was intimidating to Aaron. Rick took the man's handgun and asked, "How can we assist you?" Aaron was visibly uncomfortable. Rick's oppressive aura is too strong, but he still managed to say, "There's a community nearby where we can all survive together. I've come to invite you to join us. You're all valuable individuals, but it is up to our administrators to decide whether they can join. I'm only responsible for scouting and recruiting good people from the outside." After finishing his statement, Aaron noticed that Rick remained unmoved. He continued, "It's understandable if you don't trust me. You can see the contents of my backpack." Sasha understood his implication and handed the backpack to Rick. Aaron continued to add, "Just talking about how great our community is won't convince you to follow me. I firmly believe that seeing what's inside will give you a better understanding." Before he could continue rambling, Daryl interrupted him, telling him to shut up. Rick took out a photo from the envelope. The first picture showed the walls of their community. Aaron had been friendly throughout, and now he began explaining the materials used for the walls and various community benefits and security measures. Usually, survivors would be ecstatic and eager to join after hearing all this. Rick didn't look at the photos below. The descriptions were just too idealistic to believe. He delivered a direct punch that knocked Aaron unconscious. Some of the group members felt that Aaron didn't seem like a bad person, but they didn't voice any objections to Rick. Only Michonne said to Rick, "Maybe we should try to get to know a bit. He doesn't seem like a bad person." Rick didn't respond but addressed everyone, saying,
"We gotta secure him. Dump his pack. Let's see who this guy really is."
Rick.
Everybody else, we need eyes in every direction. They're coming for us. We might not know how or when, but they are.
Glenn didn't see anyone at the gate. He'll continue to keep watch. Carl also found something in Aaron's backpack. It turned out to be a flare gun, most likely used to signal his companions. After a while, Aaron regained consciousness, but he didn't show any anger. He maintained a smile on his face. Instead, he praised them for being cautious. Before he could finish his sentence, Rick asked directly, "How many people have you brought with you?" As he spoke, he pulled out Aaron's flare gun. This time, Aaron lost his smile. Instead, he questioned, "Does it really matter? Would you believe me even if I told you how many people there are?" Rick became even more convinced that something was amiss. Being punched and still able to smile, it didn't make sense. Aaron continued, "Would you believe the person who provided you with water on the road?" Several people turned their attention to the water bottles in his backpack. It was indeed the same brand. Daryl immediately asked, "How long have you been following us?" Aaron didn't shy away from admitting, "It's been so long that I can't even remember. I've witnessed your unity, as well as the group of walkers trailing behind you. Despite having no food or water, you never attacked each other. I wanted to make sure what kind of people I'd be bringing into the community. You are truly humane individuals. Humans are the most valuable resource in this world." The people present fell into contemplation upon hearing his words. The logic he presented was sound, and it didn't sound like lies. Everyone was exhausted, and they truly needed a place like this. Rick approached, carrying the weight of the entire group's lives on his shoulders. Rick then shook his head. He was not going to believe in pie in the sky at all. Aaron promised, I'll drive you all to the community so you can see for yourselves. We can leave now and arrive by noon. My car is parked a few miles away because the storm made the road impassable, but Rick still doesn't believe him. Michonne, on the other hand, felt that Rick was being overly skeptical. She decided to go and check if there really was car, because it represented hope. Nobody knew how much longer they could hold on like this. Rick knew that the others probably had the same thought, so he didn't object. Instead, he sent Abraham along with the others. The remaining people hid nearby, observing the surroundings. Soon, only Rick and Aaron were left inside the house. Aaron wasn't afraid. Instead, he said, "I know you're not bad people. You won't kill me. The community won't give you any trouble either." Rick remained cold and said, "Just because we're good people doesn't mean we won't kill you. If they don't return within an hour, I'll put a knife through your head." Soon, Michonne and the others arrived at the designated road. Unbeknownst to them, someone was secretly watching their every move. After a while, they indeed spotted two cars, and the road was indeed blocked. It seemed that Aaron had told the truth. They proceeded to open the doors of the vehicles and quickly searched them. The interiors were secure, and Abraham couldn't believe his eyes when he found some food that he hadn't eaten in a long time. This made them even more eager to visit the community. Since they had found the cars, they naturally drove them back to the barn. The food they discovered was brought along as well. Rick held up one of the cans and said, "Regardless of whether we go to your community or not, this food belongs to us." It was evident that Rick still didn't want to trust Aaron. However, Michonne suggested that perhaps he was lying or trying to harm them. "But up until now, we've seen that he's sincere and hasn't harmed us. Isn't this exactly what we need right now? So, we should all go." Immediately began seeking everyone's opinions. Michonne believed that Rick was being overly sensitive at the moment. Although many people remained silent, their inclination was to go and see the community. Rick didn't get angry. They were all one family. Since the decision had been made, they would shoulder it together, but everyone's guard is still up, insisting that Aaron name the route of the community. They won't let a stranger drive. Aaron had no choice but to compromise. He said, "We'll take Highway 16, and once we're closer, I'll guide you from there." Rick looked at the map and immediately said, "We'll take Route 23. The more Aaron insisted on Highway 16, the more Rick insisted on Route 23. He also suggested that they depart at sunset so that they could handle any unforeseen circumstances under the cover of darkness. Have to say that Rick has thought of all the worst possible outcomes. Later, Michonne found Rick near the cars. She wanted to persuade him to be less sensitive, but Rick said, "When you first went to the town, it seemed wonderful there, and even when we went to Terminus, it seemed perfect. Tonight, we'll reach their walls, without being able to see inside. I have to make the decision of whether or not to bring you all in. That man asked me what it would take for me to trust him. The truth is, there's nothing that could convince me to walk into their community, but it's a decision we've all made. So let's go and see." Evening, they set off in the two cars. They followed Route 23. Rick they took Aaron and led the way. Michonne then flipped through the photos. The buildings in the pictures indeed looked cozy, but she quickly noticed that there was something off. In all the photos there is no one. At that moment, Rick also discovered something in the front seat, a listening device. Glenn couldn't help but ask, "Have you been listening to us?" Rick was no longer calm. Perhaps their plan had been spotted by Aaron's teammates. As they anxiously discussed the situation, Glenn didn't notice the zombies in front of him. The car glass was covered in blood. They couldn't stop now. It would lead to being surrounded by zombies. Also worried about cars behind you tailgating and overturning after passing through the zombie hordes. And finally, the car came to a halt. Glenn was panting heavily, the adrenaline still coursing through his veins. Rick stepped out of the car and surveyed the scene. There were only zombies behind them. No signs of other vehicles were seen. It seems they didn't rush in and should be in no danger. They decided to turn the car around and go back to find the others. Glenn wanted to clean the blood off the windshield to improve visibility, but the car won't start. The zombies were closing in, and everyone was getting nervous. Unable to start the car, they had no choice but to make a quick escape on foot. Just as they were about to flee, they noticed a signal flare shooting up into the sky in the distance. Aaron's expression suddenly became particularly tense when he saw it. With the words on his lips, "I have to go. This thing is over," his demeanor changed drastically from his usual mild-mannered self. Without hesitation, he kicked open the car door and sprinted towards the direction of the signal flare, disregarding everything else around him. After thinking for a moment, Rick realized it made sense and took out his weapon to chase after them. When they reached the woods, Aaron's whereabouts were no longer visible. but they were surrounded by countless zombies. Glenn had to fight off the zombies while walking, gradually getting separated from Rick and the others. However, Glenn came across Aaron being attacked by zombies. After a moment of hesitation, he decided to save him since Aaron hadn't caused them any harm. Glenn also untied the rope that bound Aaron. Soon, gunshots were heard from Rick and the others. Glenn told Aaron to leave on his own. He needed to go and provide support, but Aaron stopped him again, assuring him that the community wouldn't disappoint them. Meanwhile, Rick was still searching for the missing Glenn, but there were too many zombies around. He had run out of bullets for his handgun and instinctively pulled out a signal flare gun. Direct fire. Both of them had no choice but to engage in close combat with the zombies. Fortunately, at that moment, gunfire sounded, and Glenn and Aaron arrived to support them. Rick glanced at them, softening his attitude towards Aaron and deciding not to tie him up anymore. They all headed towards the direction of the signal flare. Soon, they arrived at Highway 16, finding it empty without any trace of the others. The flare seems to have come from the water tower. Daryl and the others were indeed here. They saw the flare and thought it was from Rick, so they rushed to the area. Daryl was whistling. It's a code word in the team. Rick and the others quickly found them. Maggie and Carl hurriedly came out, relieved to see that both sides were unharmed. However, Aaron kept calling out a name, Eric. Aaron rushed inside where a man was sitting on a chair with a dislocated ankle. They were not only teammates but also lovers. Eric mentioned his injured ankle, and he expressed gratitude to the group for saving them. After a while, Aaron came out. Maggie and the others saved his loved one and he is very grateful. Proposed resting here for the night before heading to the community the next day. He promised to repay this kindness. Aaron appeared genuinely sincere, and almost everyone had started to trust him. They no longer insisted on continuing the journey at night. Though Rick remained cautious, he agreed with the majority. The next morning, the vehicle set off once again. Each person was engaged in their own thoughts, pondering whether the community was truly a safe place. After 4 hours, they finally arrived at the so-called community. It had sturdy walls. Everyone stepped out of the vehicles, armed with their weapons. There were no armed individuals waiting for them here. Aaron's words turned out to be true. Carol said to Rick that this time he was wrong, but his actions were right. It was the group's affirmation of him.